Buenos días.
Muy buenos días.
Nuevamente voy a presentar al profesor Nistor de la Universidad de Múnich, que nos está visitando, va a estar hasta marzo visitándonos y hoy va a realizar la segunda parte de la charla que inició el miércoles pasado sobre fake news. Pues nada más, espero que la disfrute y agradecer al profesor Nistor la oportunidad que nos está dando de compartir los trabajos y la inmensidad de cosas interesantes que tiene para contarnos. Pues muchísimas gracias. Adelante.
Muchas gracias a ti. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for being here, online and offline. I would really like to see everybody, but well, next time, hopefully. Today I'm going to present the second part of my topic, of my fake news research. Maybe just a little bit a reminder about the first part, in case you haven't seen it yet. So it was about, I started with individual traits that may be, well, may have a positive influence on receiving fake news. So the main point was negativity bias, meaning that negative news are kind of more interesting for news consumers, and thus they are more received than positive news. And then I talked a bit about cognitive processing of online news and especially of fake news. A central point is that misconceptions arise by integrating false information in the network of, in the cognitive knowledge, in the cognitive network of knowledge. And now I'm going to continue against this background with with trying to answer the question, what can we do against these effects of fake news? And I will talk very briefly about two very large categories of intervention, fact-checking and inoculation, and more today about instructional design, where I am, let's say, at home, because actually I am mainly an educational researcher. And I will present the hopefully the most interesting aspects of 4 studies that we have been carrying out in the last 1 or 2 years. Okay, so let's begin about fact-checking and inoculation. So the main way to prevent people from believing in fake news is fact-checking. So just look and see, is this true? Of course, this is a problem. We don't have access, for example, to politicians in most cases, and we cannot really know what they do and what they talk about and what they decide. So we cannot compare reality with what's written in the news. And this is also what is being described as post-truth phenomenon. So they say nowadays you cannot really know what happens, and so truth about the world and reality that was yesterday or long ago, today we cannot know that. And so more or less every news is is real. Of course, this is not real, but this is a prevailing attitude towards or in the background of disseminating fake news. And fact-checking is first of all an analytic process, rather difficult to perform, and it's very laborious. So it's wonderful if we can perform fact-checking, at least in the form of comparing news from several sources. And here there are some ideas. So consider the source, read beyond, check the author, and so on. Actually, not what I would like to talk about, because we our research on fake news goes mainly in the other direction. So it's very much about inoculation. Inoculation is not a new concept. I think the term inoculation was coined approximately during and after the Second World War, as a means to fight against propaganda from the other side. Inoculation is very much like a vaccine. That means confronting news consumers with not so strong versions of fake news, so that they would no longer just believe in fake news, but have a kind of, skepsis. So, maybe that's not true. Maybe I shouldn't take that for granted, and such an attitude. I think the idea is relatively simple, but I don't think it is very clear how inoculation can be implemented, because there are many possibilities and many kinds of inoculation. We have at least two types of vaccines against COVID, and I think there is even more against fake news. One possibility is about framing. So what we worked with is inoculation based on framing. So what is framing? Framing is a concept, I think, very common in mass communication, in journalism. And it's like, if you have a picture at an exhibition, you have a frame around it. And frames can be very different and can also have an influence on how the contents of the picture or of the news are understood. Maybe you have also noticed when you look or listen to news on TV. I must laugh from time to time when seeing the news, because actually there are separate news, but rather than not having anything to do with each other, the order in which they are presented can modify the meaning of the second, depending on the second piece of news, depending on what the first was. I don't remember very well, but I remember laughing about some cases when the second piece of news was about Trump a few years ago. And I think the people from the TV center were having fun about presenting different news and very special news just before they told us what Trump has done. There are at least three categories of framing. So semantic framing, emotional and value framing. Semantic framing is about modifying the sense, the meaning of a piece of news by framing. Emotional is a way to give to provide a piece of news with some emotions that not necessarily have to do with that information. And there is also value framing, like calling for justice and calling for truth and for everything what, our best positive principles in this world. Okay, so in our first study, we have been looking at the influence that, well, it's not an influence because it's not a causal relationship, but at a relationship between framing and discussions initiated by news. And there is here one thing I would like to emphasize. The study was about a news site, actually a very well-known fake news site in Germany, in the format of a blog. And that means it starts with an article, with a big article on some topic, mostly on politics. And below that article, there's a kind of discussion forum, and there are people discussing. And the first assumption is that what they say in the news would initiate this discussion, and the context and the quality of discussions is correlated with the article. This is a very general assumption, and I think we can keep it as it is, as an assumption. We probably don't need to check it, but in the study, we have done something more focused, looking on the one hand at the framing in the original article, and on the other hand, at quality of the online dialogue initiated by the article. And in particular, emotions in the discussions, social knowledge building, and argumentation. Social knowledge building means it's not knowledge about society, it's social building of knowledge in that way. So what we did, the data that I have here is a bit restrained. We still have or had a relatively small sample, only 8 articles containing news on this site. But you can see here 8 articles with a total of over 400 comments. That means that site has a community of discussants that is rather large and very active. So we had, for these 8 articles, we had 109 participants that discuss. Of course, this is online discussion, and I cannot really know if these are really different persons or just a few persons discussing under different names. It is possible to estimate this by automated means with automated analysis, but we haven't done that yet. And talking about automated analysis, we have used a system for automated analysis of collaborative dialogue, especially of online collaborative dialogue. That's the last point on this slide. The system is called Reader Bench. You can find it on the internet. And it's very interesting and very important to explain a bit what is this Reader Bench doing. it is based on semantic similarities. That means we can talk with each other. And we can then make a sort of sociogram or a social network. So if I tell you something, we will be two points in a network, and between us there will be a relationship, a line. But drawing such a line means that, or requires that it is clear I was talking to you. But it is as well possible that I looked at you while talking, and actually, depending on what I say, actually I was saying something for somebody else. So this is a limitation of the classic social network analysis. And what my colleagues from the Technical University of Bucharest in Romania are doing is looking for semantic similarities in what the participants say. And if there are similarities, then they draw that line, which results in a cohesion network and cohesion network analysis. And there are always some indicators of these networks, and the most interesting is the centrality. In a social network, or in a cohesion network, it is important to know who are the most central participants, because they will be important for what happens in that community, for example. And it's exactly the same with cohesion network. And we have several indicators of centrality, two of which are the simplest from all: out degree and in degree. Out degree is a centrality index defined as the sum of outgoing connections. So to how many people am I talking? And in degree is the opposite: how many people are talking to me? And of course, the higher these out degree or in degree, the more central those participants are. And in degree, out degree in a cohesion network are indicators of building knowledge. And this is what we are most interested in. So how much knowledge is being built in these discussions. Okay, so that is about the discussions initiated by a posting. And on the other side, we have done a manual content analysis of the articles, looking at framing, semantic, emotional, and value framing, looking at argumentation, classic argumentation with not only claiming something, but also indicating reasons why this is so, and bringing evidence and so on. And expressions of emotions, because if we think of negativity, of fake news, as being very attractive for attention, we expected that negative emotions would be expressed in these discussions as well, and that they will be predicted by framing in the article. Okay, so what did we find? So first of all, as a few descriptive results, in these 8 articles, which again is really not much, we found nearly 200 instances of framing, over 250 expressions of negative emotions, in those 412 comments, and about argumentation. So again, 412 comments, and only 32 containing complete argumentation structures, and mostly claims. So from 400 something, 300 plus claims in incomplete argumentation structures. So they are claiming, they are discussing very much, but this is not the classical argumentation in very, very few cases. What we expected most, that framing would predict emotions, especially negative emotions in the discussions. Well, the prediction was significant, but it didn't explain much. So it's explained variance in the emotions is less than 10% explained by framing, so more or less non-significant for this study. But a result that I found amazing, actually, we could predict very much variance, 40–50% in out degree and in degree, so in social construction of knowledge. So the more elements of framing in the original article, we'll see immediately in a minute, in a second, if it was more or less social construction of knowledge. And finally, the comments with complete argumentations were made on posts with more repetitions and less defamation. That was a significant difference. And this is what I wanted to show. So we had a list of significant predictors of social construction of knowledge, in this case of the out degree. Some positive, some negative. And let us look at the strongest predictor. So the first was value framing, call for honesty, with a regression coefficient of 0.7. That's a strong predictor. I think it is clear what a call for honesty is. Let's be honest and talk about something. And this is a predictor of cohesion in the discussion. So when this happens, people are stimulated to talk with each other. And we have this variance positively explained. On the other hand, the negative predictors, the strongest were lexical inventions. I don't know if there are such lexical inventions in this Spanish-speaking political discourse. Probably yes, but I don't know them. It's just like calling names to somebody by using invented names, words that do not exist. And it's kind of funny, or it's kind of well, the same as using striking titles. It's striking. And the negative prediction means, or this is how I interpret this negative correlation, is that when a news author is using striking titles or striking expressions, the effect would be that the discussants say, yes, you're right, wow, and so on. So they are not speaking with each other. They are saying something, yes, but this is not a dialogue in which knowledge is being constructed. And this is why the knowledge construction is going down when using this. And this would be the point where we could think about intervention. We are just at this point, so I cannot say very much about interventions, but this would be kind of intervention in the mass communication. So I suppose we could do interventions, so come and say something in such a dialogue, or this could be also done by robots, which is well, it is a technology that is being used. And not everybody can make a difference between human discussants and bots. So they're very, in some cases, highly perfectioned, and it's a possibility to use these bots. And well, we have to look at these particular cases because the profile of predictors might be different. We have only eight articles, or we had at this stage. And now we have some more, and we are analyzing the data right now. Okay, so that was about framing, and the conclusion was that framing is important, and it is strongly correlated with people's reactions. And one idea of intervention and training of information literacy or fake news literacy would be to give people an insight in framing. So the assumption is if news consumers know how framing works and what it is and what its effects are, they would be less prone of reacting in a way how the fake news authors wanted. So we have done a course, a seminar at the university for UG's and undergraduate students. So we had our participants were a group of students in the first term, so freshmen, how they say in America, and the other group of students were still in their bachelor's or undergrad study, but I think it was the 5th semester. Well, and they worked in this course with framing, analyzing fake news with a focus on framing. That was their task. Fake news, where did we have them from? There is a published corpus of fake news in German that is meanwhile, I think, some 5 years old. And most important is that these news are checked, have been checked, and it is a clear thing that they are fake. Okay, and so it's easy to say, let's get the students learn about framing and doing content analysis to find out framing. But this is not easy to do. So that means we are talking about skills, research skills actually, that need to be developed first. And in general, to do this, we need very particular instructional approaches. In this case, we used problem-based learning, and this is how the university seminar was designed. And one of the research questions we had was, what happens? So what is the effect of participating in this course? We had two groups, a total of 38 undergrad students, which is, again, not much, but this is a pilot study. The main point was the design of this course, and so most representative, there were first of all, an authentic problem description. So this corpus of fake news was real, which is hopefully more than authentic. They also had problem-solving resources, which was mainly research literature that they had to read and understand, which is normal, very normal at a university in a study. And we also had communication and collaboration resources that I'm sure you can imagine very well, because this was 1 year ago and we were at that time in the middle of lockdown. And well, I'm glad that you're here, and this is exactly what, what our students have done in this course. I'm sorry, it's ambition. It's a bit hard to read because it's very small. What you can see here, it's over one semester. The course was over 1 semester with 15 weeks. And first of all, there was some input from us as instructors and 2 large blocks of activity of our students. First, to read research literature and develop, while reading, develop analysis categories, codes for the content analysis. And in the second part of the course, to apply what they have learned. And finally, the blue boxes, this is output. So that means they had to write something, course papers, and to submit this part and present these parts to each other. Well, and the main finding was that we had a very large pre-post effect measured using fake news credibility test. That means we had a collection of fake news and we showed that as screenshots to our students, and they had to rate on a Likert scale from 1 to 7 how credible they thought those news were. And so from 32 to 21, that is an improvement. The score is, the best score was 1 and the worst was 10. So it's kind of counting errors. So smaller scores are better. And it was more or less the same for freshmen and for junior students. And well, this was a significant difference, and with a really large effect. Well, we were very happy to have not only a significant effect, but also a very large effect. The problem is this is only pre-post design without a comparison group, so we cannot speak about causality in this case. Well, we see that it makes a difference, but we don't really know why, because we didn't make any causal comparison. And I think it's very important and very positive to be a bit careful about this interpretation, because we have seen in later studies as well that actually you don't need much to have such an improvement. So problem-based learning and framing and everything, it may have an effect, but there is also clearly an effect, Hawthorne effect. We do something, at least we look at participants, and that will improve their performance, which is a trivial result. So, well, we have follow-up studies also with comparison group, with reference group. But what I would like to show you next is starting from the first example with this course. I have to look how much time we have, sorry. Okay, so it's approximately half time. So starting with this problem-based learning design, we have asked ourselves how many or what is possible. Problem-based learning is great, but there are other possibilities as well. And we have done a study in another course that is called Training Methods, and it's a master course for education students. And the learning approach for our course participants was learning by design. That means, briefly, learning something by designing that thing. And well, you can guess, I think, if the course was about training methods, our students had to develop training environments for people, training their fake news literacy. The participants were freshmen, so we worked with education students from the first semester, and we had a lot, un montón, of research questions, 6 in total, asking basically what do our students choose as a design of media literacy training. The assumption was that our master students are, well, kind of experts in educational sciences. So they are familiar with the research literature and also have some experience with, or at least a good, deep insight in the design of learning environments. And this is why we were interested to see how they design these. Yeah, also difficult to read. We had a total of 55 graduate students in 12, working in 12 small groups. So the result was 12 little projects, we call them mini projects, for training fake news literacy. And we did a content analysis of their course papers. And this is a terrible table from which you will probably not understand very much. And this is even worse. But I think we can talk a bit about this. So as an overview, there is also a focus after that. As an overview, what do we have here? On the bottom line, we have biases. For example, where's that negativity? Yes, we have negativity bias and confirmation bias and naive realism and all these psychological cognitive phenomenon that are the ground of believing in fake news. The next level were the intervention, like inoculation and fact-checking. The next level were instructional approaches, because both inoculation and fact-checking are difficult, are important skills, but difficult to develop. So these instructional approaches are necessary. For example, cooperative learning, cognitive apprenticeship, goal-based scenarios, and experiential learning. And then the big boxes, these were activities that we classified according to, I'm not sure if you're familiar to Micheline Chi and her ICAP framework. ICAP, well, the other way around. P is passive participation and active is active participation. C stands for cooperative participation, and the highest level is interactive participation. And so on the ground of instructional approaches, these instructional approaches have initiated diverse learning activities, more or less active. And then the last level, which is even more difficult to see, the last level is the technological level. So we had these activities initiated by instruction, and the activities included the use of specific functions of the learning management system. We were again in the lockdown, and the entire learning activity took place in the learning management system that is, in our case, Moodle. I'm not sure if you use that here. And so from Moodle we had some, well, quiz, assignment, Etherpad, pages, feedback, glossary, and so on. It's very, very technical. And there were also some other learning objects like Zoom conference that were outside the learning management system, but it's the same technical level. And maybe the most interesting, if you understand the, if you have an overview of this tree or network, the most interesting are the thicker lines that mean that those combinations were more frequent. So for instance, we had mostly confirmation bias, filter bubbles, and illusory truth, for which that our students found interesting, and they had many of them were approached by fact-checking, and the fact-checking was trained using, for instance, goal-based scenario, and so on, following the thicker lines up to the top level. And more in detail, for instance, in the first column, fact-checking and filter bubbles, we had, I think, most mini projects addressing filter bubbles as a bias with fact-checking. So this is where you can see some combinations were more frequent than others. And also these combinations of intervention like inoculation or fact-checking and instructional approaches. Very frequent, what did we have here? For instance, goal-based scenario with fact-checking. I had mentioned it already. What you can also see here, those, for instance, on the right-hand bottom, mini project 7. This is what the students had meant they were doing, but actually we have checked that, and that was not basic problem-based learning. We moved it to goal-based scenarios, mini project number 7. So we so those project names and numbers in italics are our corrections of the student work. Well, and so this gives an insight. I think the most important point in the results are the most frequent combinations of elements, of design elements for media literacy design, but also the most infrequent. That could be also interesting, and it is interesting to discuss if such combinations can be productive or not. Another Another study was, again, literacy training against fake news, this time for elementary school children, which is, I think, very important. It's important to start with media literacy training as early in the life as possible. And there are really not many projects where somebody has been working with children. In our conceptual framework, the basis was this level of cognitive processing. ELM is an acronym of elaboration likelihood method, meaning that depending on various factors, people may process information analytically, which is effortful, but also more comfortable and easier intuitively. So that is one point in the conceptual framework, and the intervention was inoculation again, and again by giving them an insight in framing, and the instructional approach was inquiry-based learning, which is a special form of problem-based learning. It is also called, well, in German, it is called children doing research, something like that. So learners are doing research and learning by research. Yeah, that would be the direct German translation. And this instructional approach included children looking for information online, creating methods of how to discover fake news and to protect themselves against fake news, creating own fake news. So you see here the connection with framing, debunking fake news, and practicing lateral reading. If you remember at the very beginning, there was a box with various things what you can do if you want to fact check. And lateral reading is a procedure of reading, but not only the news, also related information like who is the author credible, who is the publisher, and so on. So not only what's written in the news, but also what's around it. Oops. Okay. And the research questions were, first of all, as always, we asked if this training has an effect on performance in identifying fake news. And we also asked, how do they come to that performance? So what is the level of cognitive processing? Does our training help the children think more analytically, which would be an indicator of media literacy? And we had, again, a relatively small participant sample, but that's really difficult in schools because of ethics board, and it's the access to school children is a bit difficult. So we had 2 classes. This time we had a causal comparison. So we had 16 students in the treatment group and 13 in the reference group. And the intervention was done in 2 lessons in 2 consecutive days. The treatment was inquiry-based learning, and the reference group received the same information, but as a direct instruction, like teacher in front of the classroom and saying it's like this and like that, and do this and do that. So this time we had we had more interesting results. Again, within subject's effect, a significant difference with a large effect between post-test and pre-test. So that means the children improved their performance in the fake news credibility test. There was no significant effect between the groups, but there was an interaction effect, and it was a large one, meaning that the treatment group had a faster increase in their pre-post performance, which is, well, it's not directly a direct effect, but an interaction effect is also an indicator that we have really done something effective. Okay, and the second research question, so the scale was not, it was an ordinal scale. So we had content analysis of the explanations of these children. Why do they think that's not true, or why do they think that is true? So they explained very briefly why, and we analyzed those reasons. And it seems that indeed we had here within and between subjects effect, and both were moderate or even large, showing that the level of cognitive processing of these news was indeed improved. Well, just a few conclusions. So very straightforward. It seems that it is possible to train media literacy at very different ages. And maybe it is easier with children. And I think it's in the logic of educational sciences that children are more open and more receptive to such trainings and to information inoculation. So I think it is very important to do this more, and to also to introduce such media literacy training even in elementary schools. How exactly to do this? We have some ideas, and they were put into practice. And we will continue doing research on this. That study was actually a master study of one of my students who is going to become a teacher, and he wants to continue. He decided to continue with a PhD study on the same topic, so this will go on. Another conclusion is that inoculation helps, and we are working at the moment in the follow-up studies, asking the question if inoculation also more generally increases the level of cognitive processing, because intuitive cognitive processing is not bad per se. If experts do that, it's usually very good. It's very good. So it's not intuitive processing is not a problem, but intuitive processing done by non-experts, that can be very well a problem. And the question is if inoculation more generally increases this cognitive processing and brings people to more analytic reasoning. And it's also an educational question. So these cognitive activities and skills that we try to train are very complex. It is necessary, and we cannot do without very specific instructional approaches. And that is another open question. We have some indications here that problem-based learning, like in various forms, like inquiry-based learning, are very helpful. And this is another line of research that we are carrying on. Well, that was my presentation for today. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will gladly answer your questions if there are any.
I complain about the disability that no more people attend your speech. I think it's due to the pandemic.
Yeah.
But it's really, really interesting your topic.
Thank you.
Intervene and to treat, to improve the literacy about the fake news, how people, citizens, normal citizens, easily believe in fake news. It's very, very, very important.
Yeah.
And to intervene in the school and in the university, I think it's a good way to avoid that that fake news go beyond and fraud. At this moment, we know what happened in USA with Trump and the assault of the Capitol or something like that, totally based on fake news and lies. The people lie, and by the politicians, and finally agree by the people, and finally things happen that are bad for the democracy, for example. For this, I value a lot your work, and for your speech, I only have two questions, maybe anecdotal, but they call my attention. One is honesty. Call for honesty, better to promote interaction in comparison with justice. In your research, it seems to me that it's a positive predictor to claim honesty, but it's negative predictor they claim justice. Why? And also, what do you mean with hyperbolization? In contrast with semantic in the crowd, in the article, it has different positive and negative in terms of promoting interaction. Curiosity.
Thank you very much for your positive comments. I'm very happy to hear that. And I would just like to add that this is only a beginning. And yes, I do agree that it is important to work with students. But students are not a problem. And there are some persons like far right wing, something like that. And the access to those people is very difficult. Maybe something like interventions in discussion, in online discussions, could help more than a straightforward training. So this is my hope, that we can develop this part, and that could be, yeah, maybe it has substantial effects in the society, not only with very well chosen groups of participants. Right, and so call for honesty and call for justice. So you're totally right. It looks like a contradiction. So honestly, I don't know. Call for honesty, I don't know, because the study is not finished. What we are going to do is to add a qualitative part to this quantitative study, so mixed methods, in the sense of looking, so when we have such a, for example, such a strong predictor, where is it in the corpus, and what happens exactly at that point? And then we should get more insight. I have asked my students who have worked on the content analysis. So you are familiar with these discussions. So please tell me, why do you think a call for honesty would predict, and so on. And what I told you was the explanation of my students. We have to analyze that more in depth. And also we should remember that this prediction profile can change. So this is just a case. And this is another goal we are trying to achieve, have so not only larger samples, so from the same fake news site. Unfortunately, there are many fake news sites, and we want to achieve also a diversity. So in order to see what would be more general predictors of construction of knowledge. Yes, I'm sorry, I cannot say very much about that. Call for justice and call for honesty. I suppose a call for justice, I imagine a scene like in those Ku Klux Klan movies, where the participants think this is justice and we are going to do this, and we don't discuss about that. If we discuss about that, then it's probably against the community and suspect and so on. And so that would be a bit my interpretation of the negative prediction. We will look at that more in depth. So thank you very much for your questions. Any more questions? Maybe from Zoom? Well, if not, then thank you very much for attending my presentation online and offline. I hope in the future to be able to come again and to meet you in person, hopefully, and without mascarilla, which would be a pleasure for me. Thank you very much.